Hey guys, tonight we're plunging into one of history's most questionable medical dramas, Heartbreak and the heroic, slimy power of leeches. That's right, we're travelling back to an era when doctors had two solutions for everything: bloodletting and, maybe, try not dying. And if you dared confess that you had a broken heart, some guy with powdered hair and questionable hygiene would slap a leech on you before you could say, "I think I just need a hug." So before we get started, please take a second to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below, but only if you actually enjoy this blend of history and bedtime nonsense. If you don't, just pretend you never saw me. Now, dim the lights, switch on a fan for that all-important white noise, and get as comfortable as possible because history is about to get clingy. Just like your last situationship. Picture this. Have you ever wondered how people handled breakups before Wi-Fi, therapy, or impulse texting your ex at midnight? Did people really believe sadness lived in their blood? Was there a trendiest places to get bled list? Did anyone ever ask if the leeches needed therapy afterward? Would you survive 18th century heartbreak treatment? Or would you just fake wellness so the doctor would finally stop looking at your wrists? Congratulations. You've just woken up in 1762. You're heartbreakingly single, surrounded by candles, lace, and a man approaching with a jar that's definitely wriggling. You've woken up with a hollow ache in your chest, which, in the 18th century, very scientifically translates to, "The humours are out of balance." The local physician glances at you sympathetically, convinced your soul and spleen are both leaking sadness. Great start to the day. What exactly is happening inside you? If you could see your body the way the era's medical textbooks did, you'd resemble a sort of leaky vessel, sloshing with melancholy and bile. Love, in this world, is not a feeling so much as a fluid, a pesky, possibly dark substance that accumulates somewhere between the liver and the heart. You're not heartbroken. Your humours are simply having a mutiny. As you lie there, staring at a thatched ceiling and listening to the distant clatter of horse hooves, the diagnosis unfolds. Are you sighing more than normal? That's a classic symptom. Your vital spirits, according to Galen, are escaping through your breath, making you weak and listless. Perhaps you're weepy. Tears, after all, are considered distilled mourning, your own personal rainstorm leaking quite artistically from your eyes. If you didn't cry, people might worry the grief had dried you out completely, which is even worse. Let's talk about pain. When your chest aches, it isn't just emotional metaphor. 18th century physicians would nod sagely and point to disturbances in the flow of blood and animal spirits. The body is a series of tubes, basically the world's first plumbing, analogy for emotions. And heartbreak is what happens when there's a blockage. Your feelings, like a carriage in rainy London traffic, simply can't get through. You might even be prescribed leeches or a bleeding to help restore this inner tide, which means heartbreak isn't just metaphorically draining. The process is very literal. And yet, amidst all this, the modern you is still somewhere inside, marvelling at how persistent this pain is. Unlike a broken toe or a fever, this particular affliction has no obvious cure and no set timeline. Your neighbours, of course, are all well-meaning experts. Take a walk, dear, or brew some willow bark tea. Maybe someone's eccentric aunt suggests lying face down on the cold stone floor to chill the passions. You become the unwilling star in a parade of semi-medical advice. The pressure to perform grief correctly is immense. Mourning, especially if you're unlucky enough to be in high society, is half public theatre. Don the appropriate black, decline invitations, and cultivate an aura of dignified suffering. But stray too far from the script, recovered too quickly, laughed at an inopportune moment, and the rumour mill will have you. Are you hard-hearted? or simply so riddled with melancholy, you've lost touch with your own soul. In this context, the broken heart isn't just a private wound, it's a matter of public speculation, and, sometimes, outright entertainment. And then come the poets, because nothing, in this century or any other, fuels art quite like suffering. Your heartache is immortalized in sentimental verse, quills scratching away as bards attempt to capture your agony in couplet form. My love is gone, my spleen is grey, my humours wane from day to day. Perhaps you try your hand at melancholy letters, ink blots mingling with tears, addressed either to your vanished romance or the indifferent moon. But behind the poetry and drama is something both vastly relatable and timeless. Heartbreak, stripped of its epic metaphors and unreliable medical theories, is about loss, a reckoning with the fact that something you cherished is gone. Whether explained by humours, neural pathways, or serotonin dips, the feeling is the same: a hollowing out, an ache, a stubborn refusal of the world to match your expectations. So, you muddle through, sometimes finding relief in a friend's distracted story, or the comfort of an old song. The ache may not vanish, but you begin to navigate it, learning the strange anatomy of loss, and perhaps the very first steps toward healing. The town's most esteemed heartbreak specialist arrives, Dr. Wiggleton, who has never smiled and reeks faintly of pickled onions. He carries an oversized hat and a jar full of slimy assistants, his leeches. Dr. Wiggleton does not walk so much as he shuffles, each step foretelling doom, or at the very least, a mild inconvenience. His coat is stained in the places only the oldest bloodletters' coats are. He's stained. The hems, the cuffs, the left pocket where he keeps his special cloth. The townspeople stand aside as he passes through the market square, a living legend trailing the faint odour of vinegar and unease. With a voice like gravel soaked in vinegar, he declares, "Heartbreak. I have just the thing." The leech knows the secret pains of the heart. No one dares question Dr. Wiggleton's authority. His diplomas, 2 and 1 nearly legitimate, hang above his office door next to a portrait of his grandfather, credited with inventing the inside-out tourniquet. Anna, desperate to mend her lovesick woes after an ill-fated letter mix-up, is guided by her well-meaning aunt into Wiggleton's waiting room. The space is lined with velvet chairs and mysterious stains, as every good waiting room should be. A caged leech, Dr. Wiggleton's prize specimen, Emperor Squelchy III, regards all visitors with unblinking disdain. Dr. Wiggleton ushers Anna into his office with a curt flick of his hand. The tiny room bristles with glass jars filled with ambiguous fluids and small handwritten labels. Melancholy, excessive sighing, common ennui. At the centre of the cluttered desk sits a thick book, Modern Moods and Medieval Methods. With a grave sense of ritual, the doctor produces a squat, spotted leech from his jar and allows it to dangle ominously from a silver spoon. Anna, uncertain whether to run or faint, marvels at the sombre proceedings. Wiggleton meticulously prepares his tools: a hair-thin lancet for gentle heartbreaks, a grapefruit-sized compress for heartbreaks that will not budge, and a soothing speech about removing the ill humours of romance. Throughout, he avoids eye contact, a skill perfected through decades of sidestepping embarrassing stories and overdue fees. "Place your wrist here, if you please," he instructs, gesturing to a blotchy cushion already dented from the woes of customers past. Anna complies. The leech, delighted at the prospect of doing its ancestral duty, wriggles forward. There is a pause filled with the sound of anxious clock ticking, and the gentle slurp of Emperor Squelchy from the waiting room. Dr. Wiggleton murmurs a comforting incantation, part medical jargon, part culinary recipe. A proper balance of the humours, a dash of dandelion cordial, and a stout heart is all one needs, he says, as if heartache is simply another stain to be sopped up and wrung out. The leech attaches with determination. Anna flinches, but Wiggleton nods approvingly. A model patient. Minimal shrieking. Time in Dr. Wiggleton's office behaves oddly. It stretches and contracts, punctuated by his frequent consulting of pocket watches, sundials, and, once, a particularly opinionated pigeon outside the window. Anna's mind wanders. Did heartbreak always require this much pickled onion odour? Were medical diplomas ever supposed to be so smudged? At last, the leech, sated, drops into a dedicated recovery bath, and Anna is handed a tiny bottle of wormwood tonic, best before last Tuesday. Wiggleton scribbles in his ledger, one heartbreak, moderately alleviated, and hands Anna a bill that lists both leech rental and emotional mop-up services. As she leaves, slightly woozy yet newly hopeful, Dr. Wiggleton tips his hat. Remember, he intones gravely, should you fall in love again too soon, my leeches never judge. The door clicks shut. The faint tang of pickled onions lingers. Anna is not quite cured, but, at least for now, she is not quite broken either. The first step in your medical journey is a very awkward Q&A. Dr. Wiggleton asks if your beloved has spurned you for a rival, or if the heartbreak was caused by melancholy breezes. Apparently, any emotional problem can be blamed on the wind or witches. Soon you realize this is no ordinary doctor's visit. How is your heart? He asks, squinting as if he's searching for heartbreak with his bare eyes. Did a sable-haired temptress steal your affections, or did you just catch a chill by the east window? As he jots down the emotional weather forecast in your case file, you wonder what kind of diagnosis can possibly emerge from this bizarre blend of meteorology and gossip. Dr. Wiggleton's diagnostic technique goes something like this. When you see your love, do you suffer from a burning in the bosom, restless feet, or sudden fainting spells? If any answer is yes, congratulations, you are officially love-struck. If you claim to be too sensible for such afflictions, Dr. Wiggleton will simply suggest it's because your passions are blocked by excess black bile. He offers to clear your humours for a modest upcharge. It quickly becomes apparent that the line between broken-hearted and simply bored is thin in Wiggleton's clinic. If you're single, the problem might be an insufficiency of amorous correspondence. In other words, you're not writing enough tiny poems or leaving wilted daisies on doorsteps. If freshly dumped, then it's the witches in your neighbourhood who have targeted your romantic fortunes. The prescription, a mixture of dried sage, shoe leather, and a small plaque inscribed with your ex's initials, to be worn on a string around your neck. Whatever the diagnosis, Dr. Wiggleton maintains an air of complete authority. He's fond of saying, the heart is much like a souffle, prone to collapsing for reasons too mysterious or too trivial to explain. He quotes obscure medieval authors, some real, some suspiciously invented, about the dangers of treating sorrow with mere logic. Reason, he declares, is no match for the melancholic breezes that blow from the southwest. The real consultation, however, is not about solutions, but about spectacle. Patients are encouraged to share scandalous details of their love lives in exchange for dubious or wisdom. Did your heart flutter at the spring fair? Were you rejected at the cider stand? Dr. Wiggleton leans in, enthralled. Nobody's shame is too small, and every heartbreak deserves a bespoke unguent. By the end of the session, you are likely to walk away clutching a bag of suspicious-smelling herbs, a pamphlet on avoiding the lovesick airs, and the vague sense that maybe, just maybe, you've been diagnosed with the human condition. Still, you can't deny, as nonsensical as his methods are, Dr. Wiggleton manages to make you feel curiously seen. And in a time when real cures are few and far between, sometimes it's comforting to have a name for your troubles, even if that name is Melancholy Breezes. And the cure is write a sonnet while hopping on one leg. In the quack's consultation room, your heartbreak transforms from private torment into public theatre. And if nothing else, you leave with a story funnier and perhaps more healing than any tincture he could concoct. Before modern labs, the diagnostics involved analysing urine by candlelight and inferring depression from the shade of yellow. No dipsticks, just vibes. In the centuries before fluorescent lights and latex gloves, doctors and self-styled healers clung to the humble chamber pot for answers. Festivals of speculation would erupt over a single flask of urine. The science of uroscopy, yes, it had a name, suggested that all bodily secrets, from heartbreak to gallstones, would bubble up in the pee. Physicians carefully collected the freshly passed sample, then decanted it into delicate glass flasks called metulas. The resulting lineup could look like a medieval craft cocktail flight, except, instead of a sommelier, it was a man in a robe musing solemnly over the clarity and hue. Let's be clear, this wasn't a fringe thing. For centuries, uroscopy was serious business, codified in textbooks, depicted in medical paintings, and thoroughly indispensable for a good diagnosis. In the hands of the learned, uroscopy was an audition for wisdom itself. Did your urine sparkle like gold? Or was it muddy with melancholia? Was a faint cloud the sign of hidden infidelity, or merely evidence you'd eaten asparagus for dinner? If the shade was wrong, treatment followed immediately, as the body was seen as an interconnected system of humours, wildly subject to subtle vibes. All this urine gazing didn't stop at colour. Texture, bubbles, sediment, nothing was too bizarre for consideration. Medicine in the Middle Ages was like a never-ending wine tasting, except nobody got tipsy, and you really didn't want to be served a second round. Depression, for instance, could be diagnosed by a watery, pale yellow, presumably because lighter urine looked lackluster, and so did your mood. If you happened to wake up with robust golden liquid, congratulations. You were winning at medieval wellness, at least for now. Sometimes, this process sidled up to pure theatre. Picture a physician entering the dim bedchamber, clutching his glass metula. He holds it up to catch the trembling candlelight, peers at it with a gravitas more often reserved for communion wine, and solemnly proclaims, "The urine, madam, speaks of a disturbance of the spirits." To the waiting family, this pronouncement might as well have been gospel. A patient could be prescribed remedies from leeches to lettuce, depending entirely on what Dr. Uroscope thought he saw swirling in the glass. But it wasn't all folly. In rare moments, uroscopy worked almost by accident. Diabetes, for example, was occasionally identified when the physician sampled and noticed a sweet taste. This rather grim method of discovery became an early, if crude, indicator of a real medical condition, though we'll never recommend the medieval taste test as a screening tool. Behind the farce, there was genuine intent. People needed explanations for suffering in a mirror, and even wild guesswork seemed preferable to silence. Medicine's best guess might have involved a lengthy monologue about overheated humours or disordered melancholia. The alternative? Admitting they didn't know much. People are occasionally comforted by confidence, even if that confidence involves an alarming amount of time spent with someone else's bodily fluids. Despite its flaws, diagnosing by urine and educated speculation paved the way, however awkwardly, for progress. Every hunch diagnosis was a data point, recorded, debated, and eventually questioned. Over centuries, all those guesstimates and guesswork led to incremental improvements, until modern urinalysis replaced maculas with test strips, fluorescence, and actual science. So next time you see a cup in a clinic, remember to thank your ancestors for volunteering their own stinky science, so we could someday trade vibes for viable tests. Time for the main event. The doctor inspects his jar of leeches with the care of a man picking out avocados at the market. He's convinced certain leeches are empathetic, especially the ones that haven't eaten since spring. He peers through the rippling glass, index finger poised just above the lid, lips pursed in concentration. To the untrained eye, these creatures are indistinguishable. Glossy, undulating worms, languishing in their watery confine, indifferent to human dramas. But to the doctor, there is a world of difference. He claims he can sense which one is lively and which is a wallflower, who's merely floating by and who's secretly yearning for connection. You can't use the eager ones twice in a row, he confides, as he plucks up a particularly svelte specimen. They grow capricious, too attached. A jealous leech is no good for anyone. Selecting a leech, ironically enough, requires both detachment and deep curiosity. The doctor, whose bedside table is stacked with volumes on animal magnetism and Galenic humours, approaches the task with equal parts ritual and improv. Some practitioners favour the gluttons, reasoning that a robust appetite signals a robust constitution. Others are sceptical, opting for smaller, hungrier leeches, under the theory that desperation breeds efficiency. Either way, each choice is a gamble, too lethargic, and the leech refuses to bite, too voracious, and it gorges itself prematurely, falling off in the middle of its work. Our physician, ever the romantic, wonders aloud about his lech's private lives. His suspicion: a solitary lich is the most diligent. Pairs are distracted, trios connive, and anything approaching a lich coven leads to all-out anarchy in the jar. He fusses with their arrangements, separating those found entwined at dawn from those floating serenely in opposite corners. Whether this affects their professional zeal remains an open question, but he's convinced it does. Of course, none of this is in the manuals. The old texts recommend only that the leech be wholesome, brisk, and lively, with a sleek body, clear colour, and active tendency. One 18th century treatise even warns against using leeches caught on a Sunday, as they may be spiritually compromised. In practice, briskness is as much a matter of mood as of biology. The doctor demonstrates his selection method. Tilt the jar gently, watch which ones cling tight while others tumble freely. The clingers, he whispers, are loyalists, reliable, steady. He picks one, lets it spiral over his knuckle. It tastes the unfamiliar air, searching for adventure or perhaps just breakfast. For all this amateur matchmaking, there is genuine science. Leech selection can determine both speed and safety of the bleeding. Hirudo medicinalis, the European medicinal leech, is prized for its stamina and polite detachment, rarely wandering far once attached. Its American cousin, livestock leecherus, is less reliable, prone to tantrums. The doctor asserts, without a wink, that his leeches have distinct personalities. This one's a schemer, that one's an introvert. Consider the patient's view, reclining, wrist bared, as a stranger scrutinizes the aquatic singles scene. There's a curious vulnerability to it, knowing your blood will soon be sipped by an animal whose romantic prospects were just scrutinized. The doctor's ritual, half farce and half science, transforms the moment, injecting it with old-world ceremony and perhaps a dash of misplaced empathy for the leeches themselves. At last, he selects the one. It shimmers between his forceps, sleek, somber, beautifully disengaged. "You'll do," he nods, both to his newfound colleague and to the waiting patient. For a moment, the line between healer and hermit, science and superstition, blurs into something entirely, almost affectionately, human. You're ushered onto a rickety fainting couch. The lacy doilies are for show. You're about to become a buffet. If heartbreak didn't make you dizzy, losing a pint of blood will... Let's set the scene. The year is 1792, and emotional distress has positively ruined your complexion. The physician, fresh from a pleasant afternoon of not washing his hands, leans over you with the gusto of a man who's read medical best practices as a choose your own adventure. He tuts sympathetically, but his eyes flicker with the excitement of someone about to use their new leech starter kit. Rest assured, the science is settled. Too much blood, especially blood tainted with sadness, grief, or melancholic vapors, must be promptly escorted from the premises, via any exit available. Who are you to argue with centuries of precedent and a suspiciously eager phlebotomist? Bloodletting wasn't just a medical intervention. It was a multi-sensory experience. 1 part spa day, 2 parts outtake from a vampire documentary. If you were wealthy, this would have a luxurious flair. Velvet curtains drawn, candlelight glimmering, a silver bowl catching each dramatic drop. Poor? Well, the ambience is more barnyard chic, and the leeches look suspiciously familiar from yesterday's creek visit. Either way, the theory is that your sadness, grief, or broken heart is due to an imbalance. Too much hot blood, too little cold logic. The cure? Drain just enough to send your emotions and your headaches on a holiday. There's a bitter humour to the whole business. Outwardly, you're being cared for, fussed over, prescribed a regime of rest and gentle encouragement. Inwardly, your body is frantically sending up red flags, quite literally, while the doctor reflects on Galen's wisdom and perhaps the evening's dinner menu. Sometimes, if you're particularly unlucky, the cure isn't working fast enough. Out comes the lancet. A few more ounces should do it. Should you faint, don't fret. Smelling salts will be thrust under your nose. Or, failing that, your purse will be gently lifted to encourage immediate revival. Let us pause and imagine this prescribed misery as advice in a modern self-care column. Are you mourning a lost love? Have you tried simply bleeding about it? In today's world, such treatments would warrant, at best, an angry comment section, and, at worst, criminal prosecution. Yet for centuries, this was as legitimate as talk therapy or a tub of ice cream. Mothers had their daughters bled for lovesickness. Poets retreated from salons to restorative bleedings. The only ones not in favour of all this were, presumably, patients who survived long enough to write snippy memoirs about it. And yet, this ritual had its pageantry, a social theatre in which suffering was public, florid, noble. Faint in the drawing room, and you were signalling a rare delicacy, a depth of feeling. Bleed coppers and the fashionably listless would flock to your bedside. Your body carried a story. If you could bleed for love and live, you'd achieved something transcendent. Or at least earned a dramatic anecdote at parties. Of course, not all endings were so picturesque. Bloodletting was notoriously imprecise, and a broken heart plus blood loss could easily equal one less dinner guest. But for the survivors, there was a special cachet. You had suffered profoundly, visibly, and officially. You now possess the melancholy glow unique to those who'd seen both Cupid's arrow and the bottom of the leech jar. Would your sadness lessen? Unlikely. Would your doctor suggest another round, just to be sure? Absolutely. So while we may shake our heads at the frail science of yesteryear, let's spare a thought for these brave, pallid souls, heroes of heartbreak, champions of questionable cures, who bore their sadness and their scars with equal panache, forever immortalized on a fainting couch, doilies askew, offering their woes and a little extra plasma to history. The first leech makes contact, cool, moist, with a determination matched only by your high school crush. Supposedly, the pain of heartbreak is draining right along with your red blood cells. Of all the ancient medical marvels, few are as simultaneously reviled and revered as the humble leech. Picture it, you're languishing on a fainting couch in a candlelit wood-panelled study, your physician solemnly assuring you that these squirming creatures are the very latest innovation of about 1000 BC. To be fair, medicine had yet to invent the kind of bedside manner that reassures you a live worm is about to be your cure. Leeches, with their rows of tiny teeth honed by millennia of evolution, went about their work with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for toddlers attacking birthday cake. The reasoning was as straightforward as it was unsettling. In the grand tradition of medieval medicine, where good health was all about balance, and bad humours were blamed for everything from fevers to foul moods, bloodletting was the Swiss Army knife of cures. Sore throat? Get a leech. Joint pain? You guessed it. Leech. Grandmother's rheumatism acting up again. Slap on another leech, just in case. And doctors didn't just dabble. They were all in. Records from across Europe, China, and India describe professional leech collectors. Folks who would roll up their pants and wade into leech-infested ponds, only to stagger out an hour later, dizzy but victorious, with a bucketful of squirming medicine. How many leeches did a single hospital require? One 19th century Parisian institution reportedly went through hundreds of thousands in a good year, like Hogwarts for blood-sucking annelids. Yet for all the drama, applying a leech was deceptively simple. You just place the little wriggler near a vein and let nature and the blood flow, take its course. No anesthesia required. Patients, pale but stoic, gritted their teeth while watching their personal crimson tide be sucked away, drop by drop. If the leech dropped off early, doctors would coax it along with a sprinkle of sugar water or even a heated spoon. Persistence was non-negotiable. Strangely, leeches did sometimes have real benefits. For instance, after certain types of surgery, particularly reattachment procedures, leeches could alleviate dangerous blood pooling and promote healing. The leech's saliva contains a veritable cocktail of chemicals, including anticoagulants and anesthetics, which modern science has since synthesized and added to actual pharmaceuticals. So, congratulations. If you've ever taken medication for blood thinning, you have generations of squirming, mucousy trailblazers to thank. Still, most uses were spectacularly misguided. Did your favorite 14th century monk have a mysterious cough? 2 leeches, minimum. Feeling blue after market day? Let's see if half a pint less blood and a little leech slime can improve your mood. It's hard not to imagine that half of Europe's recurring fatigue was less bad humours and more perpetual anemia. But despite the dubious logic, leeches earned a fearsome reputation for versatility. By the 1800s, these worms were exported across oceans. Apothecaries displayed jars of them, alongside laudanum and dried herbs. Even the upper class, who prided themselves on progress, looked on as aristocratic wrists were delicately adorned with the latest Parisian leech. And in case you think this is all ancient history, medicine's weirdest footnote, think again. Leeches are still occasionally used in modern hospitals. They're unique gifts harnessed for very specific circumstances. Of course, now the jars are temperature controlled, and the leeches retire to the relative comfort of a biohazard container instead of a chamber pot. So, next time you see a sluggish, purpose-driven worm slink through a muddy pond, take a moment to salute. In the grand, sometimes revolting story of medicine, few creatures can claim a legacy quite as sticky, squishy, and surprisingly beneficial as the unassuming leech. As the leeches go to town, the only soundtrack is the crackle of wax and the slurping sounds of your new doctors. It's ASMR for people who enjoy minor horror. Add to this the gentle tap-tap of glass vials as an apothecary shuffles past, pale knuckles tightening around his tray. The flames in the sconces sputter and spit, shadows undulating on stone walls like nervous attendants. For the unfortunate on the table, even the most mundane sounds are transformed. A servant's shuffling feet, once a comfort, now a harbinger that maybe you're next. The scratch of a quill in the corner becomes the ominous register of who has survived and who has not. And then, the centerpiece, the leeches themselves. They are relentless, methodical. Each one makes itself known, not through shrieks or howls, but through a kind of sickly industry. There's an unsettling rhythm to their work, an inhale as their suckers latch on, an exaggerated pause as they fill, and then that wet, slippery squelch. It's grotesque, yet hypnotic, a squishy metronome ticking off your minutes under medieval care. Meanwhile, outside the ring of candlelight, you have the chorus of patients, those not entirely mute in their suffering. Whimpers drift from behind curtains. An elderly woman who has already fainted twice, a farmhand clutching his side as if hoping pressure can stave off the next round. Even the bravest can't disguise the sharp intake of breath as the first cold, slimy body makes contact. Some try to hum lullabies or prayers, tiny threads of melody woven into the dark, as if any sound could outlast the leech's greedy gurgling. The room hums with anticipation and dread. The air, thick with the scent of melting tallow and faint iron, seems to amplify each sound. It's not just what you hear, but what you don't hear. There's the hollow pause when all else stops, the quick silence that swells when a patient loses consciousness, or when an assistant fumbles and a leech falls to the flagstone. Even the fire appears to hold its breath for a heartbeat. Ironically, these ancient healers have little patience for drama. A muffled sob is met with a brusque, "Hush now, you'll startle the creatures." There's a stony practicality in their voices, the soundtrack of humanity's ongoing argument with pain. You're expected to be as stoic as the stone table beneath you. The leeches, after all, are working. For anyone witnessing this scene, the auditory landscape is both surreal and intimate. You catch the tiniest of details. The stickiness of bloodied gauze as it's pried from your arm. The faint clink of surgical instruments being readied for the next patient. If you're lucky, there's the faint, reassuring footfall of someone you trust, a friend or relation, hovering in the gloom, offering nothing but their presence. Eventually, as the candles burn lower and the shadows deepen, the performance draws to an exhausted close. The leeches, engorged, let go with one last mucousy plop, falling into jars. Slowly, a new sound emerges, the collective exhale of the wounded, the tentative whisper of gratitude, or perhaps simply relief that it's over. The night air creeps in as the chamber is cleared, a quiet respect settling where terror once thrived. In the end, the soundtrack of suffering is less about screaming and more about the subtler symphony, the drip of candle wax, the chorus of breaths caught or released, and the slow, persistent presence of life clinging even in the face of horror. If there is music here, it is discordant but persistent, proof that somehow everyone is either surviving, healing, or enduring until the next dark tune spins. To calm the nerves, the doctor offers a bracing cup of brandy or some suspicious herbal tea. You learn quickly that herbal remedies are just code for, we have no idea what we're doing. Such was the state of medical confidence in the days of house calls and handwritten prescriptions. The pantry doubled as the medicine cabinet. The more bottles you had, the healthier you appeared. Brandy wasn't just for toasts and tipsy uncles at Christmas. It was the first line of defense against anything from a stubbed toe to a crisis of existential anxiety. Households kept a bottle strictly for medicinal purposes. Never mind that its therapeutic effects seemed to manifest most often when Uncle Harry was telling stories, or Aunt Mabel was crying over her bunions. Doctors, with their air of authority and a waft of camphor about their coats, prescribed spirits like candy. A little nip for the nerves, they'd say, pouring you a glass that was as large as your faith in medical science. Some claimed brandy thinned the blood. Others insisted it coaxed shy germs into the open. The real magic, it seemed, was that after 2 doses, you simply stopped caring if you were sick anymore. Equally popular, though far less palatable, was the infamous dandelion tea. Harvested with an enthusiasm that suggested wild weeds might cure absolutely anything, this brew tended to taste like a cross between grass clippings and regret. Its advocates praised its cleansing effects, declaring it a powerful tonic for the digestion. Unlucky patients found themselves choking down tepid yellow liquid at the doctor's insistence. If the flavour didn't heal you, it certainly built character, or, at the very least, lowered your expectations for what counted as a soothing beverage. The logic behind these prescriptions was as foggy as a rain-splattered window. Brandy's warm burn and dandelion tea's herbal bitterness were stand-ins for something deeper. The need to offer comfort, however dubious the method. The modern patient, armed with evidence-based skepticism, might laugh at these old remedies, but back then, the sense of ceremony, sitting quietly, clutching a warm mug or a crystal tumbler, provided a ritual as important as the remedy itself. The treatment wasn't just what you swallowed. It was the performance surrounding it. The clink of glass, the quiet encouragement, the promise that relief was just a gulp away. These made the whole spectacle feel almost effective. Some patients found the whole routine rather delightful. Children peered suspiciously into murky teacups, while grandparents solemnly proclaimed the curative powers of whatever concoction was offered, recounting tales of miraculous recoveries that always seemed to happen off-stage. Of course, everyone knew someone who'd made a remarkable comeback after a double brandy and a long nap, conveniently forgetting any other interventions, or simply ignoring the passage of time as the real healer. Even the act of making these tonics took on mythic dimensions. Dandelions gathered at dawn, brandy sourced from dusty family cellars, each step in the preparation retold as folklore at the dinner table. The sick room became a theatre of the absurd, where everyone played their part, the suffering patient grimacing with each sip, the nurse urging patience, the doctor extolling the virtues of nature's pharmacy, and the family dog lurking for spilled drops. In the end, did any of these tinctures truly cure what ailed you? Possibly not. But as you wiped the taste of dandelion from your tongue and listened for the faint, comforting buzz of brandy doing its best, you understood. Sometimes, healing was as much about hope and a hint of pageantry as any real remedy. The doctor's greatest medicine was the belief that, with the right blend of pluck, patience, and potions, you'd eventually be right as rain. And if all else failed, at least you'd have a good story, told over another cup. Cheers to your health. Or whatever passes for it. If you'd like this section adjusted for more humour, extra historical detail, or greater dialogue? Just let me know. Medical privacy isn't a thing. Half the town turns up to watch your treatment. At least your dignity bled out before you did. Let's set the scene. You stagger down the main street, clutching a handkerchief to a wound. And within minutes, your predicament is everybody's business. Sometimes, quite literally. The waiting room isn't a private sanctuary. It's a living room with an audience, complete with the nosy neighbour and the postman who recognises the name on your Amazon parcels. They lean in, eyes wide, eager for a whiff of medical misery. Because who can resist the sordid spectacle of someone else's misfortune? Privacy isn't invaded. It's cheerfully surrendered, gift-wrapped in fluorescent lighting. Meanwhile, the medical staff treat you like a cultural artifact. Something interesting they might display, if only the glass case was big enough. They shout your symptoms across the room, compare notes about your bowel issues, and turn your X-rays into show and tell for interns. You become the patient with the thing, rather than a person with a pulse and, hopefully, some remaining pride. Your most intimate questions are handled with all the subtlety of an auctioneer selling livestock. Who's next for a rectal examination? Step right up. The whole process strips you, sometimes literally, of any illusion of discretion. It gets worse. Someone always knows you. A former classmate, your dentist, or worst of all, your ex. She's there for something completely unrelated, or so she claims, but now she's witness to your awkward medical reveal. You lock eyes over a sea of cough patients, and in that moment, you'd give anything to disappear beneath the cracked linoleum flooring. But no, you are pinned there by the collective gaze, forced to narrate your ailments as if auditioning for a particularly intrusive reality TV show, one with far too much information and absolutely no cash prize. And let's not forget the commentary. See, the onlookers aren't content to watch. They must also participate, offering unsolicited diagnoses, lemon, cures, or their cousin's miracle ointment. When I lost that much blood, I just ate more spinach. Someone tweets a blurry picture with the caption, "Guess who's at the ER again?" If you survive the medical episode, you'll still need to recover from the public post-mortem conducted at the grocery store. There is a perverse camaraderie here, an inverted sense of community. Your misery becomes communal property. Pain brings people together, apparently, as long as it isn't their own. You get sympathy from the old guy with 3 stents who claims, "That's nothing. Wait until you see real blood." Suddenly, you're in a group therapy session you never asked for. The cost of admission paid in embarrassment. The boundary between private suffering and public spectacle grew porous long ago, and here, it's a sieve. Yet, for all this theatrical indignity, there's something almost liberating about reaching rock bottom with an audience. There's no energy left to pretend nothing's wrong. There's no room for secrecy when the curtain is this wide open. You might even find humour in the absurdity, some kind of defiant pride in surviving the ordeal with your sense of irony, if not your dignity, intact. In the end, you don't just bleed, you perform. And if you're lucky, your performance gets a standing ovation, or at least a good story for the next unavoidable public gathering. After their heroic snack, the leeches fall off, drunk on your misery. The doctor recites a poem in their honour and tosses them back into the communal pond. You hope none learn your name. What follows is a ritual that feels equal parts medical procedure and slapstick vaudeville. One by one, the satiated leeches are lifted with the gravitas of tiny, wriggling Oscar winners. Your own role in this finale is to remain very still, dignified, and ideally not to make eye contact with the creatures who, just minutes ago, aspired to become your unofficial blood relatives. The doctor, meanwhile, waxes lyrical about their service to humanity. Because, of course, these little vampires can't help being dramatic when they're so full. Plop, plop, plop. Each leech, fat and heavy as a grape, is gently dropped back into the retirement pond, a kind of spa for the recently engorged. You wonder what conversations they'll have with their peers as they slowly glide home, trailing anecdotes of the day's work. The pond has the stagnant charm of a punch bowl at a party no one wants to host, and the leeches, against all odds, seem to love it. Your feelings toward the leeches teeter between gratitude and abject dislike. Sure, they've just performed a task so ancient it was beloved by pharaohs, but at what cost? You cradle the memory of their tiny mouths with the same reverence and suspicion you'd feel meeting an ex at a supermarket. To their credit, the leeches are nothing if not professional. No fanged farewells or jumping back for seconds. They've got their fill, and your blood is only the flavour of the week. As the doctor cleans up the aftermath, he delivers an improvised poem, equal parts praise and tongue-in-cheek ode. Oh, soft-skinned creatures of the bog, you feasted on this mortal's log. May your bellies full and tight remind you of our plight, return to waters dark and deep, and leave us with our blood and sleep. You stifle a laugh, both because the rhyme is genuinely horrendous and because it's the first moment you feel lighter all day. The leeches, unperturbed by poetry or the existential dread of being dinner guests, slither back to anonymity in the pond. There's an odd comfort in knowing that, after centuries of meals, they never remember the mains. Next comes the cleanup. The doctor, with the deftness of a stage magician, removes traces of the leech prom from your skin, tiny red marks, perhaps a stray drop of blood, the faintest suggestion of being nibbled. He promises those wounds will heal soon enough and offers time-honoured advice. Resist the urge to scratch, or you'll end up with cosmic regret and weird little scars. You commit to this as though it's a sacred oath. Despite its grotesque choreography, something about the after-party feels profound. The leeches, for all their sliminess and gluttony, are honest. They don't pretend, they don't judge, and they certainly don't outstay their welcome, unless you count the current swelling on your leg. In that sense, they're the best kind of dinner guests, the ones who take what they need, say a quiet goodbye, and leave you with a funny story for your next awkward family gathering. With the pond rippling quietly and the doctor signing paperwork in the corner, you're left alone, a little lighter in spirit and blood. You vow never to return, but know you'll remember the leeches' after-party, their unashamed appetite, the doctor's off-key verse, and your unexpected pride in surviving a tradition as ancient and oddly theatrical as this. And as you leave, you can't help but cast one last glance at the pond, making sure those slimy heroes don't follow you home. Shockingly, draining your blood does not immediately restore your cheer. Instead, you're woozy, and the doctor scribbles new notes about lingering heartbreak vapours. So helpful. You stare at the ceiling wondering who was the first person to equate misery with too much blood, and how that person managed to convince everyone else to go along with it. But as your head swims and your heart races, it dawns on you this isn't healing, it's a very official manner of missing the point entirely. In fact, the diagnosis, melancholy, vapours, excessive choler, a surfeit of black bile, or perhaps just them nerves, tends to depend less on your actual symptoms and more on which way the wind is blowing that particular Wednesday. And so you become a case study in the grand tradition of medical misadventures. One physician assures you that beneath your weary eyes lurks a surly spleen, and only a modest loss of bodily fluids can balance your humours. Another laments that your pulse is far too erratic and prescribes more bed rest, as if being horizontal under 3 layers of wool blanket will exorcise the sadness. Frankly, by now you'd rather have a hot bath, a stiff drink, and just maybe someone to talk to. But instead, it's more lancets. Meanwhile, there's an awkward silence between you and your doctor, whose quill is already poised above the page. Do you mention the restless nights, the way your worries crescendo at the sight of a rain cloud? Or do you just watch as your story gets filtered through the lens of ancient theory and recent superstition? Spoiler: the latter. Nearly every missed connection between patient and doctor is sealed with a nod and a prescription for letting some more out just in case. Misdiagnosis, it seems, is a feature, not a bug. The doctor is too busy cataloguing your complexion and temperament to check in with your reality. Perhaps you're not lovesick or melancholic at all. Maybe your business failed, or your aunt died, or it's just a rotten year for turnips. But the machinery of bloodletting keeps churning. After all, doctoring is like theatre, and each performance requires a show of decisive action. Draining, it's dramatic, a little frightening. A visible effort must surely help, right? In the rare event your condition worsens, ached joints, dizzy spells, a sudden strong desire to lie in a field and be left alone, the doctor's solution is, quite naturally, more bloodletting. This is not bad luck. It is a persistent error dressed up in credentials and a fine coat. With each treatment comes a parade of misread cues. Grief mistaken for hysteria, exhaustion for excess, and every shade of sadness converted into a flow chart of fluids to be released. Here, the story becomes less about what ails you, and more about an institution clinging to its favourite tools. Just as your veins run thinner, your patience does too. There might have been a real connection, a flash of recognition, an honest, "Are you all right?" had the doctor paused long enough to listen. Instead, there's procedure, protocol, and a convenient belief that if you bleed long enough, the true cause will float to the surface with the bad humours. Yet, as you're left weaker and a bit more bewildered, you realise most misdiagnosis is, at heart, a missed connection between medicine and your lived experience, between healer and human, between what hurts and what actually helps. Perhaps that's why these sessions feel not like cures, but like rehearsals, actors missing their lines, eager for the audience to believe that what they are seeing is medicine and not just spectacle. And so, you lay back, slightly paler, learning that sometimes the biggest backfire is not in what's taken from you, but in what's never even asked. You attempt to leave with some dignity, but now your forearm is swaddled in linen strips, making you look like you lost a fight with a bread knife. There's a peculiar phenomenon that occurs the moment a bandage wraps around you in a hospital. You transform from an anonymous civilian into a walking announcement of mishap. Suddenly, everything changes about your presence. The hospital corridor you walk through is no longer just a sterile passage. It becomes something of a runway. The nurses eye your new look, not as you'd hope, sympathetically or encouragingly, but with the same faint amusement reserved for someone who's just had their first disastrous home haircut. A bandage, particularly when it's new and glaringly white, is like a shouting highlight over your injury. You could try to tuck your arm close to your body, concealing the swaddled evidence, but it's impossible not to draw attention. People seem compelled by the sight. Strangers in the waiting room glance from your bandaged limb to your face, looking for clues as to how it happened. You become a living question mark, the centre of a silent, investigative game. Bread knife or badminton accident. There is, also, an unexpected pressure to act wounded but resilient. You sense, subconsciously, that to limp or grimace too little would appear suspicious, as though you've wrapped your forearm for dramatic effect, perhaps to get priority at the pharmacy or to look interesting on the bus afterwards. On the other hand, overplaying your discomfort courts ridicule. A narrow equilibrium must be struck. You must look appropriately afflicted, without veering into melodrama. The psychology of an emergency ward seems to amplify this effect. Here, bandages are badges of honor, a subtle status symbol competing with slings, gauze hats, and even the rare neck brace. Each patient has adapted their own grin-and-bear-it persona, giving off the impression that, yes, while this injury is inconvenient, it will never slow them down. You'll notice people shifting their body language to display their bandages more prominently, leaning into chairs with their wrapped appendage angled ostentatiously, as if to suggest an air of stoic heroism. It's battlefield chic. Even the type of bandaging says something. The classic long strip, carefully wound, suggests a traditionalist, someone who accepts medical fashion with quiet deference. The irregular, almost sculptural wrap job, on the other hand, belongs to those who have suffered something unusual. The specialist's challenge. The adhesive patch, minimal, possibly patterned, hints at an optimist, someone who believes this setback is but a temporary detour. In the outside world, a hospital bandage opens up new conversational frontiers. Your neighbours, previously content with hello and a quick glance at the mail, now feel authorised to approach. What happened? Does it hurt? Should you be up and about? For a brief period, your bandage becomes a passport to micro-celebrity. You'll find yourself reciting your injury story like it's a well-rehearsed elevator pitch, each time shorter and more rehearsed until eventually you resort to cryptic grins and a non-committal, "Oh, you know, these things happen." Of course, there's a shelf life to this attention. The bandage, once bright and pristine, starts to fray. The edges curl. Coffee or curry stains appear with inevitable precision, marking the beginning of the end of your time as a fashion icon. The bandage is demoted from statement accessory to afterthought until at last it's time for removal. What remains is just you, perhaps a little wiser, and unfashionably bare-armed. So as you exit, linen-clad forearm held at a practiced angle, acknowledge the bandage for what it is, a fleeting emblem of survival, absurdity, and, for just a moment, improbable style. Wear it well. You're sent home with instructions to write poetry, walk briskly, and try not to faint near anyone important. Centuries before Instagram closure, heartbreak was still dramatic and public. Heartache, we are assured by friends and well-meaning answers, is good for the constitution, though no one seems able to explain why a broken heart should improve digestive health or make one's skin glow. In the early modern era, matters of love were medical, moral, and a source of combustible gossip. A lovesick youth might be prescribed a strict diet, less cheese, more watercress, and under no circumstances were they to read Ovid in the moonlight. The physicians of the age, relying equally on Galenic humours and social whispers, were convinced that unrequited desire fermented in the blood like a forgotten soup, making people prone to feverish daydreams and the unnecessary quoting of Petrarch. So, you write your love letters. Carefully folded, they're tucked into sleeves, or dropped intentionally along the path your beloved travels. Your prose is overwrought, but this is intentional. Sincerity is measured in the number of metaphors you can squeeze into a single sentence. A single lock of hair, braided into the margin or dusted with lavender, is more potent than a prescription for laudanum. Yet the odds that this missive arrives unsmudged and unmocked are slim. Servants read it first and often annotate in the margins. Sometimes the note returns to you with corrections, less about the moon, more about her eyes, and an added mixture of lint, as though your letter had been swept through the entire household. Public heartbreak isn't suffered quietly. The unloved or spurned can hardly keep their condition a secret. Friends organise cheering parties, the early modern equivalent of a breakup playlist, where you're encouraged to recite your woes aloud, so everyone else can feel superior, or at least entertained. Your poetical complaints are measured, compared, and rated. 3 stars, says one friend. Bonus, points for the bit about dying alone. Gossip travels faster than healing. News of your blighted affection reaches the baker, the apothecary, and even that smug cousin who always manages to be immune to heartbreak. Convalescence is half recuperation, half public performance. You make a show of walking briskly, as prescribed, but you can't help but choose the route most likely to provide an accidental encounter. Neighbours watch with interest. A physician might advise distraction. Take up painting, embroidery, or the study of Stoic philosophy. More often, you take up sighing at windows, which at least gives you a sense of tragic decorum. There is inevitably a stage of overcorrection. You swear off love, insisting loudly that you'll become a cloistered scholar, a hermit, or a writer of bad plays. This lasts until the next party, where you find yourself, inexplicably, composing a sonnet on the back of a napkin with the help of a sympathetic friend and a second glass of wine. The medical manuals warn against melancholy by moonlight and recommend a regimen of cheerful conversation. But this is advice rarely taken. There's a unique satisfaction in nursing an unwise attachment, especially if it's fraught with long sighs, poetic metaphors, and friends who argue over whether your latest verse is the work of a future laureate, or the symptoms of what one physician delicately describes as cerebral vapor. At some point, life resumes its normal, unpoetic rhythm. The object of obsession fades into polite irrelevance. Lint is brushed away, letters consigned to drawers. The only reminder is a fond embarrassment, and perhaps a few lines deliberately vague enough to reuse, should disaster, inevitably, strike again. In the end, love, heartbreak, and recovery are as much about performance as sincerity. You heal, perhaps a bit wiser, always ready, and a little reluctant for the next disaster to sweep through your life, leaving both love letters and lint in its wake. Neighbours offer advice. One says heartbreak is cured by sleep and boiled radishes. Another recommends standing barefoot in dew. The scientific method has left the chat. The floodgates open once you're seen buying groceries alone, or walking the block with swollen eyes. I did nothing but sleep. For 3 days after Lawrence left, Mrs. Ham from down the street says, fingers tangled around her own empty ring finger. When I woke up, I was still sad, but at least I was well rested. Next door, Mr. Han retells a family fable. My cousin's son drank parsley tea and stood in the morning dew for a week, cried less by Friday. He frowns, as if considering whether to add the parsley to the shopping list. A chorus arises. Take cod liver oil. Read Ecclesiastes. Go out dancing. Go to bed early and rise with the sun. It's the forgetting that comes quietly in those first blue hours. Advice flies, clattering and contradictory, carrying the weight of generations and the resilience of survivors. Of course, the internet offers its own catalogue of cures. At 2 a.m, staring at the blue glow, you scroll through forums. Aloe vera for heart wounds, one claims. Others swear by affirmations. Allow yourself to feel, then eat 10 marshmallows, advises a post with hundreds of likes. Another, in all caps, juice a radish, drink it, trust me. You hesitate briefly at the fridge, then shuffle back to bed. Maybe sleep really is the answer. Meanwhile, the body's own attempts at healing surface in odd ways. You try therapeutic rearrangement, stack books by colour, alphabetize the spice cabinet, trim every withered leaf from houseplants. Something about order shrinks the chaos, but only a little. There's comfort in small routines. A slow cup of tea, the click of the lamp, laundry folded and refolded. You read somewhere that rituals anchor us. You hope it is true. In the absence of pharmaceutical solutions, a heartbreak pill unavailable, the brain runs experiments with the available ingredients. Salt from tears, the fizz of seltzer on the tongue, the clean citrus sting of a clementine. You drink chamomile. You try journaling, although your handwriting turns hesitant and strange. In weaker moments, you attempt the classics. You eat ice cream straight from the carton, pressing the cold against the roof of your mouth so hard it aches. You lie awake, listening to songs you should have deleted, indulging the full parade of feeling. Grief, nostalgia, anger, rarely in that order. Someone recommends yoga, so you try half a sun salutation before quitting to scroll your phone. Later, guilt heats behind your eyes. Another recommended remedy, guilt. But you remind yourself even grief has its inefficiencies. The radish remains inert in the vegetable drawer, a silent dare. But one afternoon you slice it, thin and sharp, and eat it over the sink. It is peppery, assertive, possibly magical. You wait for a sign. No thunderbolt, no sudden shift. But for a moment, you notice the bright cleanness of taste, the bodiless zing. Not a cure, exactly, but a kind of punctuation. You begin to understand. All these proposals, radishes, naps, dew, dancing, contain less about erasing pain and more about stitching time until pain shifts itself. Increasingly, you listen for what helps, if only for a minute. You allow for the nap, the phone call, the midnight walk barefoot to the mailbox. Hope attaches itself not to the success of the cure, but to the trying itself. There is resilience in rituals, a comfort in the repurposed customs of others. If boiled radishes can comfort, you will eat them. If sleep can soften, you will surrender. And so, the experiment continues. Not scientific, perhaps, but entirely human. Assemble tender advice. Boil it. Taste it. Rest a while. See what happens next. Your aunt hires a matchmaker to peruse your prospects, a woman whose main skill is judging faces for marital potential and speaking in curses that sound like compliments. She arrives dressed in brocade, with tiny bells jingling at her wrists and a kerchief as bright as a squawking parrot. As she steps through the door, you have the distinct sense that you are being summarily and thoroughly assessed, measured in some secret, arcane currency you never knew existed. Her eyes, quick and sharp, flick up and down your form, pausing the way a falcon might just before the dive. She smiles, revealing a collection of gold fillings, and announces in a voice that is both honeyed and edged. Ah, strong bones, good for bearing many children, if the stars align. You are not entirely certain what you are supposed to do with this information. Your aunt beams with the glow of vindication. You stand awkwardly, shifting on the threadbare rug, feeling suddenly as if you are not quite inhabiting your own skin. The matchmaker, whose name is Madame Petrovna, but who insists everyone calls her Baba, circles you twice more. She tuts at your posture, smooths a stray hair behind your ear, and mutters something to your aunt about hidden luck lines and marriage prospects marinating like stew. You wonder if stew is meant as a compliment or a warning. There is a moment of silence as Baba rifles through a satchel. Out come a battered ledger, several sticks of wax, and a pouch emitting the delicate perfume of dried herbs and possibly onions. She writes your name with a flourish and consults her scribbled charts, murmuring calculations about compatibility ratios, auntie's intuitions, and propitious Tuesday evenings. You find yourself holding your breath, the way people do just before hearing a future they half believe in. Your aunt presents Baba with a tray, biscuits, preserves, bitter black tea, which she accepts as her due. While she nibbles, she launches into storytelling. Tales of local marriages, runaway brides, once bold suitors, now meek husbands. Her words are embroidered with riddles and thinly veiled advice. The ox that leads must know where water lies. Darling, she says, fixing you with a look that could curdle cream. You are expected to decipher the meaning. Sometimes you suspect. She makes them up on the spot to see if you're truly listening. Then comes the moment you dread, the parade of eligible candidates. Baba unveils a notebook filled with names and thumbnail sketches, each annotated with alarming specificity. Pavel the baker fears loud noises, comes with 3 goats. Anatoly, blessed with thick hair but a questionable sense of humour. Yuri, whose mother will never let go. Each suitor is described not in glowing terms but in the language of manageable flaws. Each one a puzzle you must decide how to solve, or at least endure. Your aunt, naturally, seems thrilled by each new detail. To your surprise, you find yourself weighing each prospect far more carefully than you intended. You catch yourself wondering about Anatoly's sense of humour. Imagine goat herding with Pavel, and, in a rebellious flash, consider what life would be like if you simply declined the whole parade and ran away to do something entirely unexpected, like become a matchmaker yourself, perhaps, spinning stories and destinies out of thin air and clever words. But Baba, sensing your thoughts as if she can read your mind, leans in close. It is not only luck that makes a good match, it is having the wit to know what you want. Listen to your heart, child, but not so closely that you miss what life tosses in your path. She winks, perhaps a warning, perhaps a blessing. The session ends with laughter, nervous glances, and, as always, the faint promise of possibility. The matchmaker departs as quickly as she arrived, leaving behind the scent of spices and a flurry of speculation. Your fate, single or otherwise, feels as uncertain as it did before. But you sense, quietly, that the story is yours to shape, after all. At some point, it's expected you'll write sonnets about your misery. If you can't play the lute, you may be forced to look wistfully at clouds. Suffering for art is considered healing. Sort of. This is when the moon is your audience. You pour your confusion, longing, and existential sadness into late-night doodles, stringing mismatched rhymes while perched on a windowsill. The world, of course, doesn't notice your pain, but the process transforms you. Not into a better person, perhaps, just into one with a slightly better vocabulary for loneliness. In fact, there's something almost standardized about the rituals of poetic suffering. Maybe you buy a notebook with thick, creamy pages, ideal for ink blots and dramatic lines like, "The shadows echo my heart's hollow refrain." Suddenly, you're in a romance with your sorrows. Maybe you try watercolors, brushing blue and black across paper in a literal depiction of your mood. If you own a musical instrument, the universe will conspire for you to play only minor keys. If not, well, humming melancholic tunes while staring at puddles is a valid pastime. Art doesn't judge the earnest or the awkward. The poems don't have to be good for the catharsis to count. In fact, the best poetry of gloom is often dogged and embarrassing. Years from now, you'll flip through those poems, maybe while moving apartments, and cringe at what you felt so fiercely. But there, in ink, will be the proof. You survived something, and you made something out of it, even if all you made was a rhyme about rain. Of course, there's a performative edge to this entire affair. Everyone has their sad fiddling under the moon phase, even if it's just metaphorical. This is when you start quoting Rilke or Pablo Neruda on social media, usually late at night, possibly with a grainy black and white filter for emphasis. You might not even understand all the poems, but that matters less than the act of participating in the grand tradition of artistic suffering. If you're particularly committed, you'll workshop your heartbreak into a short story, perhaps one that involves rain, unreturned letters, and a protagonist who gazes listlessly into the distance. Bonus points. If someone smokes a cigarette in a dimly lit cafe, and yet, beneath all the drama, something actually shifts. Sorrow, filtered through art, is less overwhelming. The more you process your pain through creative acts, the more distance you put between you and the rawness of what hurt you. The moon, silent as ever, seems to witness all of it. Everyone feels like the first person to ache this deeply. Poetry and art gently remind us we are not. The whole business starts as melodrama and ends, softly, as shared humanity. On particularly dramatic evenings, you might even try composing a song. If your skills are limited, that's even better. Nothing says authenticity like 3 clumsy chords and a heartfelt vibrato. Perhaps you call your best friend and make them listen through the phone, holding for applause that never quite comes. Still, vulnerability is the first step to healing, and somewhere in the awkwardness, you'll find a bit of pride. Not for the quality, heavens no, but for daring to express what you most wanted to hide. Eventually, the tide of raw feeling recedes. The sonnet notebook gathers dust, the sad watercolors curl at the edges, and the moon rises again to watch someone else's heartbreak. When you look back, the art you made, however imperfect, is evidence that you endured. It's part of your own little myth. The suffering wasn't all bad. It was, at the very least, productive. And if you ever need perspective, just reread your old lines about clouds. If you don't laugh, you're allowed to roll your eyes and thank the muse that such dramatic evenings don't last forever. Local apothecaries sell broken heart amulets, featuring things like squirrel teeth and knotted string. You're told to wear it close to your heart and to try not to choke. If this seems odd, concocting magic from what's left after rodent dentistry and a sewing lesson, rest assured you're with the majority. And yet, for much of human history, this kind of sympathetic magic was a frontline defense against heartbreak, illness, and agricultural disappointment. Its underlying logic, like Atrax slinks around the edges of ancient wisdom and contemporary impulse, both. In other words, if you want to heal a broken heart, why not patch it with something that looks or feels, well, broken, or at least small and formidable, like a squirrel tooth, nature's little multi-tool. Sympathetic magic splits neatly into 2 camps. First, homeopathic magic, where like affects like. Sprinkle dirt from a champion's grave on your running shoes, hoping to channel their speed. Or in this case, a lucky sock. The richer the sock's history, undefeated in regional bowling tournaments, perhaps, the more potent its energy. Next, contagious magic, which proposes that things once connected remain mystically linked. Hair from a lover's comb, ashes from a burned letter, the wishbone suspended in the kitchen's highest alcove. Each continues a relationship with its source, for good or ill, like a particularly persistent ex. Our ancestors took these principles seriously. Archaeological digs turn up amulets inscribed with feverish prayers, animal bones knotted with hair, and shoes. Always. Shoe. Sometimes a pair. Walled up beneath thresholds. Shoes, used and unwashed, were favourite vehicles for good luck, perhaps because they carried the sweat and luck of their owner. These rituals weren't frivolous. They were attempts to impose order on a senseless world, to bargain with the chaos just beyond the door. Today, sympathetic magic shows up most often in the spaces between science and sentiment. The good luck charm isn't about physics, but about the psychological comfort found in ritual. Athletes, despite access to the latest performance analytics, still cling to scruffy hats or unwashable jerseys. Students clutch exam pencils, only slightly chewed at the end, as if graphite and wood could absorb anxiety. There's something soothing in small, tactile rituals. Tying a red thread around a wrist or kissing a pendant before entering the train station might look quaint, but there's precision in the repetition. Each charm, a jagged stone, an heirloom coin, a folded piece of paper sealed with wax, collects meaning by proximity. The more battered and improbably lucky, the better. Sympathetic magic's mechanics, while easy to mock, also explain the emotional logic behind some modern behaviours. Why do we close our eyes and make a wish before blowing out birthday candles? Why save the stub of a concert ticket? Why, in moments of uncertainty, reach for a faded bracelet or finger an old key? We are, at the core, pattern-making creatures, coaxing reassurance out of the material world. This isn't mere superstition. It's proto-psychology, a way of managing risk and seeking agency in a landscape that rarely offers guarantees. At its best, sympathetic magic gives us hope, a chance to believe, if only briefly, that luck is something that can be invited, channeled, even worn close to the heart, or somewhere within reach, provided you remember not to choke. So if you should find yourself at the counter of a local apothecary, weighing the merits of a squirrel tooth versus a knotted string, know that you are part of a very old tradition, one that persists in sock drawers, jewellery boxes, and the small sacred spaces of daily life. The magic, of course, is not in the object itself, but in the meaning and story you bring to it. Title: By sundown, everyone knows you've been leech-bled and speculates that you're dying from love, or possibly just an allergy to pond creatures. It takes less than an hour for Mrs. Cartwright, peering between her nasturtiums and her neighbour's privet hedge, to position herself as chief disseminator of the news. It is a role she accepts with grave enthusiasm, making the rounds with her creaky basket and an updated tally of your misfortunes. Heartbreak, mysterious fainting, and the scandalous detail that your shoes were muddier than decency allows. Rest assured, by the time the bakery closes, 3 new variations of your heartbreak have already been kneaded into every loaf. Perhaps your beloved sent word he'd taken up with a fishmonger's daughter, or maybe he was last seen at the tavern, haunting the dartboard with a haunted look. Rumour in a small town is not transferred so much as it is brewed, steeped in a pot, left always simmering on the edge of someone's curiosity. Every detail, no matter how trivial, is tenderly stoked, exaggerated, and then served up, often with a pat on the hand and a tragic shake of the head. People's sympathy is genuine, but their appetite for spectacle is even more so. Why simply console the heartbroken person when you can conspire to imagine their next meltdown, when you can watch, ostensibly out of concern, for further signs of collapse? Heartbreak is not a private matter here. It is a town festival, and your tears are the firework display. There's comfort, perhaps, in this unwanted intimacy. Your suffering, which at first felt so sharp and isolating, is now shared, though admittedly in ways you wish it wasn't. Your sighs are echoed and imitated by children. Your limp, initially from mosquito bites and pride, is now performed in exaggeration by the town's chattiest grocer whenever you pass by. A single wilted bouquet of wildflowers left at your doorstep sparks rumours that you have a secret suitor. It was probably a child, eager to escape chores. But the gossip is relentless. Every new ache or sniffle you show is attributed to love's cruel bite. By week's end, even the parish priest is moved to offer you discreet but heartfelt advice about mending your soul and your constitution. Ironically, the grapevine works both ways. Suddenly, you discover other hearts are breaking in echo of yours. The fishmonger's apprentice, he of the two sad eyes and perpetually blue mittens, has taken to sighing in your general direction. Two mothers anxiously compare notes on the various ways their sons have started penning tragic songs in your honor. Songs about doomed affection and the perils of leeches. It is, you realize, a contagion, a pandemic of heartbreaks. Everyone is infected, each person's brush with sorrow mutating as it passes from one telling to the next. The wisdom of the elderly is invoked. Old Mrs. Bramwell, who lost 3 husbands and a fortune to bad investments, announces loudly in the market square, "Ah, love, worse than influenza, better than the pox." She punctuates her observation with a cackle, and suddenly, instead of a pitying glance, you're treated to communal laughter. For a moment, the fever breaks. People remember their own entanglements, their own brush with folly and gossip, apples thrown at windows, love letters intercepted by goats, entire autumns spent scandalized by a glancing touch at the midsummer dance. Heartbreak, in the end, is a civic ritual here, a rite of humiliation, yes, but one in which everyone must participate sooner or later. By the time the moon rises, your story, exaggerated past recognition, has joined the endless carnival of local law. And while your pain is still yours, it's also theirs now, shared and therefore, in a strange way, almost bearable. Even the most relentless gossips soften their tone after the third retelling, turning your heartbreak from a scandal into a lesson, and finally into a joke. And tomorrow, of course, they'll find someone else's pain to pass around the dinner table. For now, you are merely the latest vessel for an old, unquenchable thirst, the need to belong, even if it's only as a cautionary tale, until the next misfortune strikes. After a week, the heartbreak is less raw. Is it time or the mild anemia? Either way, you can now listen to harpsichord music without bursting into tears and/or fainting. You are not happy exactly. Happiness is a hot, distant planet that used to be in your solar system and is now lost in the far reaches, like Pluto, but less cheerful. What you have now is a cautious, neutral grey that stretches evenly across your brain. It's not the bright springtime green where love once lived, but it's blissfully devoid of fireworks and melodrama, and you're grateful for it. Compared to the hurricane of feelings that demolished your mental living room earlier this week, numbness feels like stepping inside a calm, temperature-controlled shopping mall. You check in with your body. It's still there. Your heart seems to beat at an acceptable pace. No sudden panic. You don't flinch at every notification. You don't take an anticipatory deep breath when walking past the coffee shop where you used to meet. Something inside you has gone quiet. Some might call it resignation. You choose to think of it as equanimity, or at least a useful kind of autopilot. It would be poetic to compare this to the feeling after a fever breaks. The body fragile, a little depleted, but so desperate for normalcy that even a day with bland crackers and daytime TV feels like a reward. You can eat now, or at least stare at a sandwich for a while without crying into it. Sleep returns in piecemeal segments, gifted to you by a merciful universe that has decided, for now, to give you a pass. People sometimes interpret numbness as failure, like you didn't love hard enough, or you're refusing to process things correctly. But from inside, it feels like a dense, knitted blanket thrown over exposed wires. Numbness is a kindness. It's the anesthesia after surgery, and you're not meant to remove the bandages just yet. You have regained some of your capacity for small talk, thank God. You can answer, "How are you?" with a non-committal shrug. You have opinions about weather again. You read the headlines and do not project your sorrow onto every political event. The world continues, and so do you, albeit at half volume. Your daily rituals become buoying rather than burdensome. You make tea because it seems like a grown-up, healing thing to do. You fold your laundry as if the rhythmic stacking of warm socks is an act of self-care, evidence that you do, in fact, exist. The toothbrush becomes an amulet, its repetitive motion, a little prayer for order. No one mentions your heartbreak while you do these things, so you start to pretend that maybe it's gone. It's tempting, in this softened hinterland, to wonder if numbness is permanent. Is this who I am now? A person who becomes invested in the correct way to store Tupperware lids, who can't recall what passionate longing felt like. But then, you remember enough emotionally overwrought moments from just a week ago to know this is a phase. You're in emotional convalescence, neither broken nor whole, but moving steadily, one muted day at a time, toward the rest of your life. There's relief in letting go of hope for grand, cinematic closure. The heroic text won't arrive. You don't need it. The numbness is the body's way of putting up scaffolding around your faltering spirit, giving you the privacy to rebuild. The world and your heart are both messier than any story wants them to be. By the end of the week, the harpsichord has lost its power to torment. You can hear the careful plucking of the strings and think, that's pretty, and that's all. You can walk past the coffee shop and notice the smell of bread more than the ghosts. This feeling might not be joy, but it is peace, a pale, strong, kind of peace. And today, that is more than enough. You pen a letter to your lost love. It's half apology, half threat, and you definitely spill tea on it. There's no unsend button in 1762. Let's set the scene. It's a blustery afternoon. Your chamber is chillier than usual, and regret hangs in the air, like your mother's perfume after she's stormed out of the room. You reach for a slightly crumpled sheet of parchment and your least leaky quill. With a sigh, you begin to write, steeling yourself with a robust cup of something that's mostly gin. The language must be precise, but also ambiguous enough to haunt them. Your first lines should disarm. Dearest Reginald, or whomever you've become. I do hope this finds you in better health than when last we parted, when you claimed my soufflé tasted like betrayal. Opening salvo. Courtesy with a whiff of contempt. You continue, sliding between regret and accusation like a fencing master. I must apologize for the misunderstanding regarding your cherished wig. I never intended the cat to think it was prey. Again. And then you pivot, sharpening your quill's nib for the next strike. It is perhaps a marvel that someone, so adept at hiding his true feelings, and correspondence from Lady Willoughby, who sends her regards, should take umbrage at the occasional emotional outburst. Pause to dip your pen. Marvel at the mess you are making. Ink, spilt tea, and feelings everywhere. Passive-aggressive notes are, above all, about plausible deniability. You insert subtleties. I trust the household is well, now that the shrieking has abated. The servants, or yours, I cannot recall. You can't resist a sting in the tale. It must be so restful in your new residence, free from the clamour of honest conversation. Compliments should always sound vaguely threatening, like the distant approach of thunder. Next, conjure nostalgia, selectively. Do you remember the evening we danced until dawn at Lord Brighton's? I have quite forgiven you for stepping on my toes, though the limp persists. Here, the reader must question if your heart ever healed, or if you're just hobbling on the inside. Then, deliver your pseudo-forgiveness. After much reflection and a significant portion of this balakim I understand now that love is a banquet of mismatched forks. One should expect the occasional puncture wound. Feeling literary, you close the middle section with an unsolicited update. As for me, I am thriving. The tapestry room is nearly complete, and the neighbours only seldom inquire if I am unwell. Insert 2 cryptic lines about a gentleman caller, just enough to make Reginald's cravat unravel itself. Your sign-off is equal parts polite and poisonous. Warmest regards, and should you ever require a character reference, I'd be delighted to mention only your more manageable foibles. Add a generous flourish to your signature, ensuring half the page wrinkles with damp. Don't forget the postscript. This is your last chance for precision snark. P.S. If you find the enclosed handkerchief, I do apologise for the embroidery. It's simply the word no in several languages. I thought it apt. Finally, seal the letter with a dollop of wax. Stamp it, perhaps with your family crest, or an experimental monogram that could just as easily say vengeful as virtuous. You send it out into the world, knowing there's no retrieval, no edit, and that words, once written, can be as indelible as heartbreak itself. Thus, you have achieved epistolary closure, not with grace, and certainly not with composure, but with the poetic satisfaction of a tea-stained page, and a conscience as clear as your intentions are cloudy. Inevitably, you spot your ex at the village market, and there are strict protocols for snubs, bows, and which side of the street contains leech ponds. It's all very dignified. Not. The art of the ex encounter is older than the market stalls themselves. In the days of yore, or at least so one imagines, the choreography dictated a predetermined sequence. First, a subtle narrowing of the eyes at a distance, like 2 dueling pistols being drawn under the gaze of the public. Then, the careful calculation. Do you take the route by the bread baker, or chance a perilous stroll past the soap stall, where slippery missteps could be excused as coincidences? The local etiquette books, unofficial, mostly written by gossips under their breath, held forth on whether a nod was a grave insult, or, in a turn of fashion, the only acceptable olive branch. In the present day, the scenery has shifted, but the script often remains eerily similar. The supermarket aisle quietly replaces the cobbled lane, and instead of buckets of eels, we have aisles of discounted hummus. There is a new choreography, an awkward ballet of shopping trolleys and, "Oh, fancy seeing you here," flung out with way too much brightness. Status updates aren't just for face-to-face encounters anymore. Sometimes the keen observer will notice the post-market uptick in passive-aggressive social media posts. The spectacle continues long after the nectarines are bagged and paid for. Much as we might hope for dignified restraint, the rules are more often observed in the breach. Etiquette, then and now, has always harboured escape clauses. Take, for instance, the classic feigned fascination with turnips, or the borrowed child from a neighbouring stallioner, launched into service as a pint-sized distraction, sent on an errand to buy imaginary radishes. Bold souls might attempt the high road, a direct greeting, intentionally light. "Hello, how have you been?" As though neither party ever exchanged tearful sonnets on the state of their souls. The riskiest move, of course, is the full U-turn, marching back toward the cheese stall with an air of sudden inspiration, telegraphing to the entire market that you'd forgotten something utterly essential. Perhaps a wedge of Gouda to nurse your wounds. In the historical version of this market dance, word of your behaviour would flutter through the grapevine faster than a gust on washing day. Eyewitnesses enriched the record. He bowed, But he did not doff his cap. Or, in a bolder voice, she crossed to the leech pond side. You know what that means. No one was ever quite sure what it meant, but it was never good news. An expert might recap this encounter at dinner with extra embroidery, sighing heavily about the collapse of standards since the invention of the pickle barrel. Our modern etiquette relies on minute analysis too, just with more pixels than pickles. Did you see how she liked my old post about the dog? He's still following my aunt. Each non-verbal signal becomes a data point, each sigh a subtext for elaborate theorizing. The witnesses are remote, but just as eager to comment. WhatsApp groups flicker with improv analysis, worthy of any village green. What remains unchanged, years, stalls, tech, upgrades aside, is the push and pull between performance and self-preservation. The best moves are still improvisational. A raised eyebrow here, a nervous laugh there, and the inner hope that one didn't have spinach in their teeth midway through the snub. Dignified, though coveted, remains just out of reach for most of us, because the true heart of etiquette lies not in tradition, but in our beautifully flawed attempts at it. In the end, whether negotiating muddy leachside lanes or fluorescent-lit produce sections, the greatest unspoken rule may be this: just make it through with as much grace or humour as you can muster, then reward yourself with an extra pastry, or, at the very least, a silent round of applause for a game well played. You're comforted by friends bearing turnip soup and rumours. Some recommend leech-blooded broth for stamina. You politely decline. This is the season of dropped baskets on stoops and hastily scrawled notes. Heard. About your troubles. Ring twice if you need me to ward the doorway. You might never know who pressed that bundle of garlic bulbs and honey under your pillow, only that it warmed the night and quieted your dreams, for once. When affliction or misfortune circles your home, people arrive with small, practical magics, blankets, carved tokens, an impossible recipe for dandelion tea that promises to stiffen your backbone, at the very least. Ordinarily, you might hesitate to ask for help, or fear that you are a burden. But when the door knocks 3 times at dusk, you find yourself smiling before you've even answered, grateful for the interruption. Their presence isn't loud, but it fills up the dim spaces inside you. Friends air out their most outrageous advice. Sleep with rosemary in your socks. Take a spoonful of horseradish at dawn. Write your worries on birch bark and burn them with last year's calendar. You laugh and listen, folding their suggestions into the stack with all the rest. Possible, impossible, or just plain odd. It hardly matters which, because their concern is what stitches the real magic, binding you to the world outside your own skin. Not all sympathy comes in sturdy, edible forms. Some friends, the ones you circle back to in strange hours, bring enchantments meant only for you. An old satchel of letters, a collection of pressed leaves from places you've never seen. Or a softly whispered spell, cast not with flourishes, but in the silent moments when they listen as you list your complaints against the universe. You learn. Spells are often just old hopes, repackaged and passed across kitchen tables. When someone sits with you, not saying much, but not leaving either, that's a spell too. The world feels less sharp-edged in their company. There are spans. There are, of course, those who come with stories rather than advice, tales of others who survived worse and triumphed, or at least didn't succumb. Remember Mary, they remind you, who lost her shadow for a year, but fashioned another from black silk and never let on. Maybe the stories have been polished over time, each retelling rounding off misery's corners and adding a small victory at the end. Only after many weeks do you realize these stories are incantations too, designed to call forth a little courage while keeping despair at bay. The gifts you receive, whether fragrant soup, a laughably heavy quilt, or just an ear, require something in return, though no one says as much. You repay the magic by letting them help, by sharing the secret griefs you've been carrying folded in your sleeve. In a community stitched together by mutual oddities, this small vulnerability is an offering. You notice sometimes how those who came to comfort you linger a bit longer than necessary, how they leave lighter, as though some trace of their own burdens was eased in your company too. When you're ready, you find yourself ladling soup into someone else's bowl, or murmuring recipes and reminders you once received in the same worried tone. You catch yourself tracing old protective sigils on their doorframe, whispering reassurance into steam and silence. The magic goes both ways. Every kindness re-enters the world, transformed, only to circle back at a different angle when you need it next. At night, when dawn is still hours away and troubles feel largest, you remember the turnip soup, not its taste, but the shape of the visit, the warmth in the room, the way the air hummed gently with shared hope. Soothed, you slip towards sleep, wrapped in the patchwork comfort of every friendly spell and awkward blessing that came to save you, delivered in bowls and words and quiet company. And so, you endure, one strange kindness at a time. Some days are harder than others. Grey skies and church bells bring it all back. You consider buying more leeches just to feel again. Then, remember the price. The rain taps insistently on the window, not asking permission, but demanding remembrance. Each drop beads into a constellation on the glass, mapping out that old ache across a city you once knew by footsteps and cigarette smoke. The air is heavy, like a soaked coat that can't quite be wrung out, no matter how you try. Even now, you catch yourself glancing toward corners, as if something familiar might crawl out from the shadows. Not a ghost, not exactly, but the weight of every yesterday you thought you'd escaped. You tell yourself it's just the weather, that melancholy is only a byproduct of barometric pressure. But memory is clever. It attaches itself to the mundane. A shoe left by the door, the scent of wet asphalt, even a familiar chime from the clock tower 3 blocks away. Sometimes, on days like this, your mind reaches for an old comfort, even if it means flirting with the edges of disaster. Fumbling through the desk drawer, your fingers brush against the faded slip where the apothecary's address is scrawled, and for a moment, you nearly dial the number. That memory of the urge is almost as sharp as its fulfillment. But you know the math now, how each quick fix carves deeper ruts in your sleep, your skin, your sense of tomorrow. You sit at the table and watch the sky bruise purple behind the buildings, uncertain whether to blame the relapse on the storm or yourself. The leeches are gone, burned in a fit of resolve, their absence a quiet victory you almost regret. You think about old habits like old friends, bad company, but reliable in their own way. Outside, car tires hiss on wet roads. Somewhere, children shriek and laugh, heedless of any past but their own. You envy them, their unbroken afternoons, all sunshine and scrapes that heal overnight. You close your eyes and try to remember what that was like, to have hunger without an ache, to have longing without shame. Instead, you find yourself cataloguing each small defeat. The missed call, the unopened letter, the collection notice, slipped under the door, as if you needed another reason to forget how to hope. You stand and cross to the window, watching the churchyard fill with puddles. Bells toll out the hour, a metallic, forgiving sound that makes you think of confessions and second chances you never dared to take. You wonder if there's mercy on days like these, when the world seems determined to remind you of every slip backward, every hour forfeited to old desires. But the rain keeps falling, patient as regret, and you learn to sit with it, to let it seep through the cracks without letting it flood you out completely. On the mantel, an old photograph grins back at you. A younger self. Eyes bright. Grin unapologetic. Untouched by aches yet to come. You consider turning it face down, but leave it upright. Some ghosts don't bother haunting you. They just wait, quiet and persistent, for you to find your way back. As dusk folds into night, you draw the curtains and promise yourself that tomorrow you will walk, coat buttoned tight, through whatever weather comes. Maybe you'll buy flowers, or write a letter you'll never send. Anything to make it through in awkward safety high frame. You're staying. And for now, you keep the leeches in your memory, not your veins. For now, remembering is enough. And for now, the rain forgives everything you are still learning to leave behind. Eventually, you regain your strength. The heartbreak becomes a footnote, something to mention years later, with a laugh and a discreet glance at your wrists, just to check. It doesn't happen all at once. There's no triumphant sunrise, no swelling orchestral moment where you suddenly feel whole again. Instead, it's a slow, meandering recovery, like trudging up a muddy village lane after a rainstorm, shoes squelching, heart heavy but determined. Maybe you still feel the phantom twinge of old wounds, but you're also aware that you're no longer the patient in the sickbed, feverish with loss and melodrama. You're on your feet now, and that's something to marvel at. You start to notice absurd little joys creeping back in. The bruised fruit at the market, the dog woefully tangled in his own leash, even the unreliable warmth of the early spring sun on your face. These things make you smile, to your own surprise. The heartbreak hasn't entirely disappeared, but it's found its proper scale, a cracked teacup at the back of the cupboard, important but not commanding centre stage. Your friends, bless them, stop tiptoeing around you. At first, their concern had the awkward intensity of a Victorian spinster offering you smelling salts. Now, it's all gentle teasing and harmless gossip, as if daring you to rejoin the living. Slowly, you realise you're laughing at their jokes again, rolling your eyes at their antics. And that, too, is its own form of medicine. Looking back, you almost appreciate, in a twisted sort of way, the lengths to which the broken-hearted have always gone to mend themselves. Once, you might have tried bleeding out your sadness, or applying a dubious ointment meant to restore the spirits. Now, you craft the world's most melodramatic playlist, doom scroll with a bag of chips, and absorb meme after meme until, inevitably, you snort laugh and forget just for a moment why you felt so awful. Progress, in its own ridiculous way. There's a fresh, quiet wisdom to be found after heartbreak, one that the history books usually skip. Yes, there were wacky cures, there were desperate leaps of faith, but ultimately every era boiled down to the same stubborn hope, that something better, or at least something less humiliating, might be waiting ahead. Superstition, science, or Spotify. Human resilience is the common denominator. You start to realise that all those generations, with their odd rituals and their monumental blunders, were just trying to crawl out of the same swamp you're slogging through. There's comfort in that solidarity, even if it's several centuries out of sync. You begin to tell the story less and less, the way a scar fades so slowly you don't even notice. It turns from confession to anecdote, and the pain is replaced by a kind of pride. You survived heartbreak, not by bleeding or brooding, but by finding the thread of your own stubbornness and following it forward. You start to suspect that recovery isn't about escaping heartbreak, but about learning how to carry the memory without letting it drag you under. Maybe someday you'll come across someone else in the thick of it. You'll offer them your own updated remedy, a playlist, a pet meme, a walk in actual sunshine. You won't mention leeches, except maybe as a punchline. And when you do, you'll both laugh, grateful to be living in a time when the heart is mended, not by bloodletting, but by patience, community, and a healthy sense of the absurd. And so, as you slip down into sleep in your warm, clean bed, unbled and leech-free, let's take a quiet moment to thank fate for modern heartbreak solutions. Playlists, memes, and not a pond creature in sight. The people of the 18th century really did their best with what they had, mixing superstition, science, and more than a little desperation in equal measure. History was sticky, itchy, and full of wild medical theories, but also marked by the resilient weirdness of the human heart. Always optimistic, always stubborn. Tonight, may your dreams be gentle and your pillows free of bloodletting kits. Sleep well, and remember, in the long, exhausting romance of history, at least you survived to tell about it. And so, as you slip down into sleep in your warm, clean bed, unbled and leech-free, let's take a quiet moment to thank fate for modern heartbreak solutions, playlists, memes, and not a pond creature in sight. The people of the 18th century really did their best with what they had, mixing superstition, science, and more than a little desperation in equal measure. History was sticky, itchy, and full of wild medical theories, but also marked by the resilient weirdness of the human heart. Always optimistic, always stubborn. Tonight, may your dreams be gentle and your pillows free of bloodletting kits. Sleep well, and remember, in the long, exhausting romance of history, at least you survived to tell about it.